Hi friends, welcome back to the Grace-Filled Classroom. I'm Keisha and I'm so glad you're here today. As we're approaching our 1-year mark of homeschooling, I've been doing a lot of reflecting about learning, struggle, and what really helps kids thrive. If you're a parent, a homeschool parent, or a teacher who has ever looked at a child and thought, I know they're capable, so why is this so hard? This episode is for you. In my last episode, we talked about why slowing down helps kids learn better. And while that conversation really matters, I want to zoom in today on when the idea matters the most. Because here's what I've seen again and again, both professionally and personally. Learning styles matter most when a child is struggling. And when I say struggling, I don't mean just struggling academically. I mean seasons where family life feels heavy, mental health feels fragile, energy is low, routines are disrupted, or life just feels like a lot. And honestly, sometimes the struggle isn't a big dramatic thing at all. Sometimes it's just a hard season. Long winters, low energy, disrupted routines, everyone feeling a little more tired and a little less patient than usual. I've also been hearing a lot of burnout lately from parents, teachers, and kids. Long stretches of cold, low sunlight, disrupted schedules, and all of that adds up. And when our energy is depleted, learning often feels harder than it actually is. Because struggle doesn't stay neatly contained, right? When a child is overwhelmed emotionally or physically, learning is often the first place it shows up. When a child is thriving, we rarely stop to question the system. But when a child is struggling, that's our cue to pause and reassess. Not the child, but how we're teaching. I want to say this clearly and without judgment. Traditional classrooms and even mini homeschool approaches naturally work very well for certain learners, specifically reading and writing and auditory learners. Think about it. If a child learns best by listening, reading, writing, sitting still, school often feels manageable, maybe even enjoyable. And that is wonderful. But it's important to say this out loud. That doesn't mean those learners are more capable. It means the teaching style matches the learning style. Alignment is happening. And this is where I want to slow us down for a minute because the shift I'm talking about usually shows up before academics fall apart. When learning stops aligning with the child's learning style, it often shows up emotionally first. Parents begin noticing things like homework that used to take 10 minutes now ending in tears, a child who understands everything verbally suddenly freezes when asked to write, frustration that escalates fast over very small tasks. A child saying, I can't do this, even though they could yesterday. Complete emotional exhaustion after school. Meltdowns that feel out of proportion to the assignment. Avoidance, shutting down, or giving up before even trying. Or a child who suddenly says they don't want to go to school. We experienced many of these signs ourselves last year. And that was the light bulb moment I could no longer ignore. The gentle nudge that something deeper was happening and that it was actually time to listen. And this is the part I want to say gently but clearly. When learning starts costing a child emotionally, something needs to shift. Not expectations, not effort, but approach. Struggle is not failure. Struggle is information. It's a child's nervous system communicating, this isn't clicking, this feels overwhelming, I'm trying, but the way this is being taught doesn't work for my brain. But they don't have the words typically to explain that out loud. When we miss that signal, kids often internalize it as, I'm not smart, I'm bad at school, something must be wrong with me. But when we understand learning styles, we hear a very different message. For us, that message sounded like, I hate school. I had never heard that before, and it stopped me in my tracks because I knew she loved learning. Her curiosity, her never-ending questions, her desire to understand the world has always been there. What she didn't love was the format. So let's make this really concrete because this looks different depending on how a child's brain is wired. Let's be honest, most kids don't fit neatly into one box, but they usually have a dominant way their brain prefers to process information. Kinesthetic learners are the kids often who struggle emotionally first. They might fidget constantly, resist seat work, hold it together all day and meltdown at home, seem defiant when they're actually overwhelmed. They process learning through movement and doing. So when they're asked to sit still, be quiet, and learn only through paper or listening, learning becomes exhausting. A shift for these learners might look like building instead of writing, acting things out, walking while reviewing facts, shorter lessons with movement breaks. When we add movement back in, the resistance often fades. Not because expectations changed, but because access did. And visual learners often look quote-unquote fine until they're not. They may nod along during explanations, seem to understand in the moment, and then fall apart when asked to apply the information. Too much verbal instruction delivered too quickly overwhelms them. They're the ones that need visuals, charts, color, models, time to see patterns. Slowing down for them often means fewer words and more visual anchors. The good news? This does not require a curriculum overhaul. For visual learners, support doesn't have to be complicated. Small shifts like writing down key words, using color, drawing quick sketches, or letting them see an example before expecting output can completely change how learning feels. And auditory learners often know the answer until they have to write it down. They may explain ideas beautifully out loud, participate confidently in discussion, then freeze on tests or written work. They don't lack understanding. They need a bridge between spoken thought and written output. Letting them talk it out first can completely change their confidence. Reading and writing learners often thrive in traditional settings, and that matters because when the system works for them, it can feel like it should work for everyone. But when it doesn't, learning styles stop being optional and start becoming essential. And this is where I want to gently name something I hear often, especially from teachers. Many teachers have been using the same curriculum for years. And honestly, it makes sense. Curriculum choices are expensive, time-consuming, and often out of a teacher's control. But here's the important shift I want to invite. Changing how we teach doesn't mean throwing out what we teach. You all know I'm a huge fan and encourager of multimodal teaching. And multimodal teaching isn't about abandoning curriculum. It's about delivering that same content through different doorways, visual, auditory, movement-based, so more students can access it. If a child is thriving, the current approach may be working just fine. But when a child is struggling, holding tighter to the same method often increases frustration for everyone. Sometimes the most caring thing we can do isn't to push harder with the same tools, but to pause and ask, is there another way to teach this so it can finally click? When you see patterns starting, it changes the way you interpret struggle. And here's a reframe I want you to hold on to. Struggle is not a sign to push harder. It's a sign to look closer. If a child is struggling with math and finishing their math worksheet at school, sending it home for them to finish at home is not helpful. We need to adjust how we teach. When we slow down, diversify, and teach more intentionally, we often discover the learner was capable all along. Imagine that. Learning styles do not lower expectations. They remove unnecessary barriers that we often see in education. This is actually the heart behind what I'm quietly working on right now, creating something for parents and teachers that helps them teach in a more multimodal way, so learning can meet kids exactly where they are. If your child is emotional, exhausted, resistant, or discouraged, you are not doing something wrong. You're noticing the signal. And noticing it is the first step towards helping learning click again. Have you ever pulled a test or worksheet out of your child's folder and felt completely confused? A low grade when just the night before you had a conversation about the topic and you know they understand it. That's often a sign that the format of assessment, not the content, is the problem. This is something I've shared before, but it's worth repeating. When a child is struggling, it's not about what they're being taught. It's often about how they're being asked to show what they know. For some kids, traditional assessments, worksheets, written tests, long assignments don't reflect their understanding at all. They may know the material deeply, but the format becomes the barrier. Sometimes a powerful shift comes from understanding how your child learns best, and then advocating for flexibility in how they demonstrate their learning. That might look like explaining an answer verbally instead of writing it, using visuals instead of paragraphs, breaking assignments into smaller pieces, showing understanding through projects, movement, or conversation. This is something I've seen over and over again. When we change the method of assessment to match a child's learning style, confidence often returns before academics even improve. That's why I created a learning styles quiz not to label kids, but to open up conversations and possibilities. Because when we can name how a child learns best, it becomes much easier to ask for the flexibility they actually need. And if you're a parent listening to this, I want to say this clearly. Advocating for your child does not mean criticizing a teacher. It means partnering with them and saying, we're noticing our child understands the material, but struggles to show it this way. Could we try a different approach? That's not asking for less. It's asking for access. And this matters whether or not a child has a diagnosis, because learning styles support how learning happens, not just why it's hard. And before we wrap up, I want to share a quick personal moment that really brought this truth home for me. We made a simple shift in our math curriculum, not because she couldn't learn, but because the format wasn't serving her. Moving from a full workbook page to one question on the screen at a time reduced overwhelm instantly, while still allowing us to use hands-on manipulatives. And when she answered incorrectly, it didn't just get marked wrong, she was given a hint on the screen, sort of like an invitation to think again. In that moment, mistakes become part of learning instead of a stopping point. That single shift honored how her brain processes information. It matched the learner instead of forcing the learner to match the lesson. Nothing about my child changed. We simply taught differently, and confidence followed. Remember this, you do not need to fix your child. Your child is not a problem to solve. God designed each learner with intention and purpose, and often what looks like a struggle is simply a signal that learning needs to look different. When we teach in ways that honor how our children were created to learn, we help them step into confidence, one grace-filled moment at a time. Thank you so much for being here and for caring so deeply about the way your child learns. If this episode encouraged you, share it with a friend or fellow teacher who could use a little more grace in their days. And before you go, be sure to follow on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube so you never miss an episode. Thank you for spending this time with me. May God guide you with wisdom and fill your days with peace. I'll see you next time on the Grace-Filled Classroom.